everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Alex, and today I'm going to be talking about Red Rising by Pierce Brown. If you have not heard of Red Rising, chances are you were probably not a big science fiction fan, because Red Rising is just one of those names in modern times that seems to be synonymous with sci-fi, and it took me a really long time to get to the first book. Now, the complicated thing about this series is a lot of people, when they talk about the Red Rising series, they're talking about the trilogy, like they sell the box sets for just the trilogy, but there are technically 6 books that are out now, and I don't really know what my course of action is on whether I plan to read the trilogy or all 6. Probably depends on how I would feel about the series continuing forward, but I can definitely tell you that I have a lot of feelings about the first novel. But before I get into that, I have to give you a synopsis. This is the story of Darrow, who is a hell diver for the Reds, which is the lowest caste in a color-coded society on Mars. He works an extremely dangerous job mining an element called helium-3, which allows people essentially to terraform entire planets, and the Reds are constantly told that they are the ones paving the way for other colors to come up to Mars and be able to leave a dying Earth. Of course, the entire time Darrow and his people have been lied to, because the other colors are already on Mars, having created an essential utopia, and the Reds are slaves. A series of events then happen, which I won't get into, that put Darrow in a unique position to compete as a Gold, which is the highest members in this caste system, in order to obtain a position of power to free his people. But in the struggle to win the game, he becomes the thing that he hates most. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this story, particularly because it is one that is so highly regarded. Some of those thoughts are positive, some are negative. I'm going to be jumping around because my feelings about this book are quite complex, much like certain aspects of the story. I can tell you at the very beginning of Red Rising, I was quite concerned what this narrative was going to be when it seemed to me like it was Captain America meets the Hunger Games. Darrow is literally transformed from a weakling with a lot of potential into a hulking tool and machine for the Red cause. So he basically gets jacked and then is thrown into this game. And in case you're wondering what the time frame was for the Hunger Games versus Red Rising, the Hunger Games came out in 2008 and Red Rising came out, as I mentioned, in 2014. Both of the main characters, Katniss and Darrow, are also 16. And if you think that the only similarity between these two narratives is that it revolves around a game where kids kill kids, that is not true. In the Hunger Games, there are 12 districts, and at the Institute, there are 12 houses. Each district is known for producing some type of resource. It could be that they're fishermen, that they're miners, that they grow food. Well, the houses at the Institute also are known for particular qualities, which is why they choose their students to fit a certain house, and they are given resources based off of whatever their house represents. But because we spend less time looking at the students of the houses and why they were selected for a particular house, I would prefer to compare instead the districts to the color coding system of the capital S society. In the society, different colors have different roles, and they have varying levels of importance in this hierarchy, and also different amounts of power. I'm not going to go over all of the colors because, one, we don't see all of them in Red Rising. They probably come up later, and there's just so many of them that I don't want to cover them all, but I'll give you a handful. The low reds are from the mining colonies, yellow is science and medical, gray are the guards, obsidians are like these giant hulking warriors that essentially can dominate different planets, and they're also in charge of protecting the golds, and the golds are the highest ruling class in this world. Now, the one thing that I can definitely say about Red Rising is that there's more politics, there's more reveals, there's more backstabbing. To the book's credit, I like that much more than in the Hunger Games. Overall, it's just more brutal, more gory, more honest about what it would be like to actually war with other factions and the ways that people play dirty in order to try to win. I am going to give a trigger warning here for sexual assault because the students of the Institute do that to each other. That is an element of this book. I initially struggled with what age range to put Red Rising into because The Hunger Games is so obviously YA. It's not just about Katniss's age, it's also the way in which the book was written and the language that was used. I read it as a teenager. I felt like it was appropriate for me. Reading Red Rising now, I would tell you that I would not ever want to give that to a teenager. It's not just about the level of violence. It's not just about the politics. It's about the sheer sexuality of this society. So in this caste system, one of the colors I didn't talk about are the pinks. The pinks are sex slaves. They are born into their color. They are raised from birth to pleasure other people. They are taught before they even hit puberty how to take care of others. They have absolutely no say in what they want or who they're going to be with. They're just dragged around wherever they're told to go. That was horrifying, and it's a really big part of the book. The pinks are talked about all the time, particularly in a derogatory way. I would not want to give this story to an underdeveloped brain who cannot understand any nuance of what is going on. So I am very firmly putting Red Rising in the adult category. Would not recommend giving this to your teenagers if you have any of them at home. And because of that fact, this is where the comparison to the Hunger Games ends, I promise. From here on out, we're only talking about Red Rising. In terms of the plot beats, the world building, the dystopian tropes that were incorporated into this novel, I would definitely say that they were well executed. Obviously, not all of them ended up being new, but for what was there, it was well done. I would definitely put this more so in the dystopian category than in the sci-fi category. There is sci-fi elements, like they have stun weapons and like these invisible shield armors. They talk about patrols like space cruisers, you know, with missiles that can destroy planets, though you never see them in this book. They show up, I'm sure, later on in the series. The biggest element of this story that indicates science fiction to me anyway was the genetic modification. The fact that there were different castes in this society that modified themselves in order to appear superior and stronger than the other classes. And that plays a huge role for Darrow because he has to go from having a red body to a gold body and get used to now being stronger, faster, more agile than he ever was prior, and it's a completely new kind of sensory experience for him. From the beginning of the book, I would definitely say that Brown has a writing style that will hold your attention, but it wasn't necessarily exciting from the get-go. I wouldn't describe it that way, but it picked up a lot once we got to the passage. The passage is essentially the line in the book where Darrow goes from being a red in a gold's body to acting like a gold, because he has to do something that's so savage, so unlike himself, so mentally taxing for him, that now we get to see what he's willing to do in order to win the game. And that is a key point in the story where he kind of starts becoming the thing that he hates. Most of the characters in this story end up being flat. Like, they don't have any sort of like character development or personal growth over the course of the story. They might change allegiances or decide to like go with different tactics for winning the game, but in terms of their core personality, they're not really any different. Our main person, of course, who ends up having any sort of growth is going to be Darrow, and that was honestly kind of sad for me because I liked a lot of the side characters, and I wish maybe that there had been a little bit more with them, that we had seen them kind of change as people, but they didn't, and we just have to live with that. And in that same vein, kind of what I mentioned earlier, is there are so many houses at the Institute where these students are competing that we don't spend any real time seeing why each student ends up being put into a particular house or why that house chose them. We just know that Darrow was chosen for House Mars because he scored very highly in Rage, so it made sense that he would be a part of the warring house. One of the aspects I really loved about the world building is actually the gold hierarchy and where they fall into society, because for the golds, they are so ruthless and so determined to have only the best that even at infancy, if a child is not born to the best house, or they're not born the healthiest, or they end up not being the smartest, they will just be killed. And at the Institute, there is a certain level of death, a threshold, essentially, of students who can die that the society will permit. That's how cold and unfeeling they are, even about their own people, and that's why other colors, especially the reds, view golds as being monsters. These children are told and permitted to win by any means necessary, use any tool that you have in your arsenal, be as brutal as possible, because in order to win the game, what they have to do is they have to subjugate every other house. And how do you subjugate the other houses, you might ask? Well, you turn them into slaves. by branding them. Now, the branding in this game isn't like a permanent brand. It's not with fire. It's with these sticks that essentially have an insignia on them, and when you tap it to somebody's forehead, it burns that house mark into them, and they have to do whatever you say, otherwise they will be shamed. Each house has 50 students in it and one proctor, and the proctor is essentially the head of that house who is supposed to provide resources and assistance to their students, but the thing is they're not actually supposed to interfere in the game to make it to where one house wins over another, because that would be cheating and absolutely does not play any part in this story at all. You do have to take at face value that we are told many times by Darrow that every single one of these 600 kids is a genius. And I feel like part of the reason he has to keep telling us that is because they don't act like it. Darrow goes into the Institute, goes into this game knowing that he is probably the best candidate in order to win, because these other golds have never had to experience the hardships in their life that he has. He had a hard, brutal, dirty, demeaning life living as a red, and so he's like, well, I've suffered far more pain than any of these kids have, so obviously I'm gonna win. Now, you all know that I love politics in my sci-fi, so at the very beginning of the story, it's shallow, it's superficial. I was like, oh man, I hope we get more. By the end of the book, the politics is everything that I wanted. It goes surprisingly hard. I like the way that the golds are structured, where there are betters and lessers even among this highest class, just based off of which family you're born into, and sometimes even whether you're considered conventionally attractive can determine your place and how far you can advance. Darrow has to learn things like, how is the society rigged? Can the rigging be broken? Where are the alliances coming from? Can new alliances be created? And that is what hooked me into the story. That's what kept me reading, because those elements are my favorite parts of books. And I loved the reveals because honestly, some of them were juicy. When the action picked up at the end of the book, I was so dedicated to finishing the story that I didn't want to put it down. I just loved it that much. And when I finished Red Rising, Keaton wanted me to give him a synopsis of, the plot beats, because he wasn't sure that he wanted to read it, and he's never worried about spoilers. So I told him everything, and he looked at me and went, wow, that sounds really good. And it is. Honestly, there are so many positive aspects to this story overall. That said, I really do think that in terms of the audience for Red Rising, that there are some demographics that are going to find this book lacking, so I want to talk about that really quick as well. If you are seeking a story that has strong female characters, queer representation, or positive POC characterization, this book is not that. Every single female character in this book falls into one of three categories: weak, deceitful, or a tool. That's it. For queer representation, there is absolutely none whatsoever. The only thing that you're going to get are the male characters attempting to instigate fights and insulting one another by saying things like, oh, what are you, attracted to me? Which is particularly weird in a book where the society is based on the Greeks. If you know, you know. For POC characterization, there is literally only one individual who is given both a name and any level of importance in the story who is not fair-skinned. And he is a horrible fucking person. Like, you are meant to despise him. He is absolute trash. So no, this book is not perfect. It has flaws. There are many times when the male characters in the story are just a bunch of meatheads. And you could chalk it up and just say, yeah, but they're a bunch of 17-year-olds. Like, what do they know? Their brains aren't developed yet. Or you can look at the fact that Pierce Brown was not a teenager when he wrote this book and think about that. I'll leave it up to you. I'm sorry that the lighting in here changed. The sun moved, the cloud coverage moved, there's snow on the ground outside, and it made the light extremely intense, and I had to lower the shade, and it kind of created this fun pop of color behind me, just to let you know where that came from. That is to say that Red Rising is the first book in a series of 6, okay? I know that it is entirely possible that these elements are addressed later on down the line, and I really hope that they are, because I think that it would make the stories more inclusive overall. But these were my feelings about Red Rising, and so if I'm going to give a final rating for this book, with issues and positives all included, I feel like it would be very fair to say that this book is 4 stars, because while it has flaws, when it's good, It's really good. Let me know down in the comments whether Red Rising is a book that you've already picked up and what your take is on it, or if you're interested in picking it up, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, that you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.